Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So for today's video, I'm going to be answering questions in the Deja Vu Book Tag. I was not tagged by anyone to do this tag. Instead, I watched Andrew from Andrew's Widgetly Reads. I watched his tag video for this, and I loved all of the questions, and I thought that it would be interesting for me to tackle these questions. And it's called the Deja Vu Book Tag because all of the questions revolve around rereading, which if you would have asked me like 5 years ago or even like 3 years ago in the past, like I probably would have said like, oh, I don't like to reread. I want to just read new books because when I got into college, I kind of fell back in love with reading and I just wanted to catch up on a lot of the books that I missed. So I was not rereading almost anything. It was almost exclusively new to me books because I just wanted to read as many books as possible. But this past year or so, I've been rereading quite a bit, and it's kind of a happy accident because I'm kind of rediscovering a lot of past favorites that I've read over the past decade or so, and it's just been delightful. And on top of that, I've noticed going through my stats for the year that I've been giving out a lot of 5 stars this year, but most of the 5 stars that I've been giving out have been rereads. So I've been loving all of my rereads. It basically started with, well, I guess we'll get into it in the video. Okay, enough of the preamble. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So question 1, I've kind of already answered. Do you reread and how often? Like I said, in the past, I was just reading books that were new to me, but this past year, I've been going back and rereading a lot of my favorite books. So going into that question 2, why don't you reread? So I've been wanting to reread because a lot of my favorite books, even though they are my favorite books, I have a little bit of book amnesia. So I don't necessarily remember everything that's happened in these books that I've read, especially books that I've read years and years ago. So it's just fun to sort of jump back into the world of the book that I read years ago and rediscover so many things that I loved about the book. At the beginning of the year, I was sort of rereading Stormlight Archive, which is my second favorite fantasy series of all time. And going through that, reading Way of Kings and Words of Radiance and Oathbringer to prepare myself for Rhythm of War, there was a lot that I remembered, of course, but there were so many like little details and things that I caught on the second time that it was just an amazing experience. And I did the same thing with The Poppy War. I reread The Poppy War and The Dragon Republic to catch myself up on The Burning God so I could read that. And I loved The Poppy War and Dragon Republic even more the second time. So I guess that kind of answers question 3 as well. What have been your favorite books to reread? So far, my favorite books to reread are like epic fantasy series. And pretty much before this year, the only books that I had really reread a lot was my all-time favorite series, which is A Song of Ice and Fire. I've read the whole series, the first 5 books, twice, and I think I've read the first 3 books 3 times, something like that. And I plan on rereading it next year, sometime next year, because I really want to jump back into Westeros and Essos. But definitely for me, jumping back into fantasy worlds and fantasy series that I've read and rereading them has been a lot of fun. And there's definitely some series that I want to get to again. guess I keep jumping ahead of myself here. Question 3.5. What would you like to reread? Well, I already mentioned it, but I'll show off a lovely copy of A Game of Thrones. Now, I've already read this book like 2 or 3 times at this point, but it's just so much fun to get back into the heads of these characters and just find little nuggets of details that like I've missed, even though I've read the book a couple times at least, and just all the foreshadowing that George sprinkles in here. It's just a lot of fun to go back and reread these. Also, a new favorite of mine this year, probably my favorite book that I've read this year, Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I absolutely fell in love with this book because I'm such a huge classic rock fan, and it's all about like 60s and 70s rock music and just band drama, and just everything about this book appealed to me. And the moment I finished the book, I wanted to reread it. And usually I don't have that feeling, even for books that I absolutely love. I'm just like, yep, I loved it. Now let's go put it on the shelf. But for this book, just the minute I got to the last page and read it, I immediately wanted to jump back into it. And I will definitely be rereading this probably once a year for the rest of my life. And I'll definitely be rereading it next year. When that will be, I don't know, but I'm definitely going to squeeze it in. All right, now we're sticking to the questions here. Question 4, what book do you predict will be so good you will want to reread it? So in November, I'm planning on rereading one of my favorite fantasy books, Kings of the Wild, which I know I'm going to still love this book upon a reread. But I'm also reading the sequel, Bloody Rose. Kate from the Literary Apothecary is doing a read-along, and she's going to be doing a subsequent live show with the author, which I'm very excited for. I haven't read this book yet, so I'm going to be very excited to jump into this. And I know that if it's anything like Kings of the Wild, and if it's just as good, I know I'm going to be rereading both of these. Question 5, pick a book from your younger years that you think would be interesting to reread. Now, this is kind of cheating because I've reread this book several times in my life, so I already know I'm going to love it upon a reread. But that book would be Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie. I read this book in middle school when I just joined band and I just started getting into drums. So I found this at like a Scholastic book fair, and I was like, oh, that's appealing. And, you know, with a title like Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie, you think you're going to get one kind of book, and you think it's going to be kind of fun and like explosive and just a lot of fun, right? But this book was actually very like down to earth and very just sad and depressing. And it was very dark for like a middle school book. I did not expect it to go in the direction that it did. And I still liked it though in middle school. And I've been rereading it just several times in my life. And I'm going to be rereading it in November, right around my birthday or so. And I know, and it's a quick read. So it's a middle school book. So the font's really big. I'll be able to read it in a couple hours. And, you know, this is a book that I plan on continuing to reread. It just resonates with me very well. Question 6, tell us a series or book that's so big or complex you need to reread to better understand. Now, I don't know if I'm choosing this series because it's complex, but I did forget a lot of it, even though I read it a couple of years ago. And I'm going to go with the Witcher series. Now, I've already reread the first 2 short story collections, and those were fantastic on a reread. And even though, like I've said, I have very bad book amnesia, even though this is probably my 3rd or 4th favorite fantasy series at this point, either Dark Tower or Witcher falls into that category. I don't remember a lot about the plot in this book. And some would argue that the plot isn't very great, that it's mainly about the characters, and I would agree. But I do want to go back and just have a refresher of like what actually happened in these books, because they definitely bleed into one another, kind of like A Song of Ice and Fire, like those books. It's kind of hard to like think of those books as separate. That for me, like those books are just a series, right? Sort of the same thing with this series, because I couldn't really tell you what exactly happens in the first book here. And then if I were to tell you like specific scenes, maybe in the later series, but just overall, like I don't remember a lot about it. So this is definitely a series that I want to reread and get to very soon. Question 7 is very interesting. Is there a specific type of genre you think is best or worst for reread potential? And I've kind of already hinted at this, but definitely the best stuff to reread is fantasy, because they're just long, epic series that you can just really get lost in. You can really get stuck in the thoughts and minds of the characters that you grow to love, right? And like I've said, book amnesia, you can kind of almost, not quite, but you can kind of reread it years later, like almost it's the first time you're reading it. So for those reasons, I love going back and rereading fantasy series, but probably the worst books to reread, and I'm not even sure if I've done this yet. I couldn't tell you, but definitely the worst are like mysteries and thrillers. So something like The Couple Next Door, which is one of my all-time favorite mystery thriller books. It starts, if you don't know what it's about, it starts out like right away with a gut punch where this couple realizes that their baby's been stolen. First chapter. And it just goes from there, and it's just nonstop. But, you know, reading this for the second time might not be as fun, because you kind of know where the story is going. You know the twists and turns that it's going to take. So it's not necessarily good for rereads, especially like if you remember everything, right? So I've read this book a couple years ago, and I don't remember everything, right? Book amnesia. But I definitely remember like the main stuff that happens. Like it's hard to forget some of the stuff that goes on in this book. And then similar with books like Gone Girl, right? Like you already know the main twist, right? So at that point, you're just reading it to see if the author like has any foreshadowing, or just if you really like the characters. But for me, like mysteries and thrillers are definitely the worst books to go back and reread. I mean, to be honest, I'm not even sure if I've done that yet. I don't know. But yeah, for me, mysteries, thrillers are kind of a one and done deal. And question 8, is there a book you've liked more upon reread? Now, I've talked about this several times on my channel, and if you're familiar with my Stephen King content, you'll know where this is going. And that would be book 1 in the Dark Tower series, The Gunslinger. Now, this book is, or can be, very jarring for first-time readers. It definitely was for me. When I read it, I thought it was fine. Like, I gave it 3 stars, and I wasn't terribly impressed. But I did want to continue, and I'm very glad that I did, because books 2, 3, and 4 were just so good, and just, they were a lot better than the first book. And then as you continue with the series and you get to the ending, you just realize that the series is just magnificent. And then once you finish the last book, you're kind of tempted to go back and reread the series just to see like how much foreshadowing there is, right? And how much, and you just love the characters so much, right? And so, you go back and reread this book, and it's just eye-opening. Like it's a whole different experience reading it the second time after you know everything. And it's just so much better. So it went from being a 3-star read initially to a 5-star read the second time. And it's probably the biggest jump in a reread for me. Like it went from being like an average book to like an all-time favorite. And then question 8.5, is there a book you liked less upon reread? I have 2 examples here. One of them will be well, both of these will be unpopular, but the first one is fantasy related. I love Brandon Sanderson, but for me, the Mistborn trilogy is just never one of my favorites. Although I do like the first book. When I reread The Well of Ascension, I was just bored, and like it was fine, but it went from like being a 4, maybe even like a 4.5-star book the first time I read it, where I was initially intrigued by everything, to like a 3-star book the second time I read it. I just wasn't impressed with it the second time. And then, sadly enough, The Hero of Ages. The first time I read this, I wasn't impressed. Like, I gave it 3 stars. There were some aspects to it that I enjoyed, but overall, there was just a lot of character perspectives that I just did not care for. And I went to reread it, and I couldn't finish it. It went from being a 3-star read to a very quick DNF. And it's by far my least favorite Cosmere book. So, yeah. These books do not hold up upon a reread like Stormlight, and I'm sure a lot of his other Cosmere books will be. And speaking of Stephen King, we have a book that will maybe piss some people off, I don't know. But for me, even though I do very much enjoy this book, The Shining wasn't as spectacular for me the second time. Now, the first time I read this was kind of like my true introduction to Stephen King, because when I was in middle school, I read The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, and I didn't love it as a middle schooler, and I also read The Eyes of the Dragon, which was good, but it's very atypical Stephen King. Now, this is the third Stephen King book I read. I picked it up in college right before Dr. Sleep came out, and I grew up watching The Shining movie several times. This is my second favorite movie of all time, other than Pulp Fiction. But, oh God, now I've lost my train of thought. Oh shit.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I break your concentration?
I picked it up right before Dr. Sleep came out, and I absolutely loved it. 5-star read, and then I read Dr. Sleep. Again, I loved that book. And then, I think what I remember is that I wanted to reread this book and then reread Dr. Sleep before I watched Dr. Sleep the movie. And so I read this book, and to be honest, like, it was good. Like, it was interesting to get back into the minds of the characters. But for me, like, I already knew what was going to happen, and I kind of got bored with some of it, not all of it. But it went from being like a 5-star, like, top 10 Stephen King book for me all time to like a 4-star book, and maybe more like a top 20 Stephen King book. So it definitely dipped in quality for me a little bit. And actually, at this point in my life, I like and enjoy Dr. Sleep more so than The Shining, which I know can be an unpopular opinion, but I think, this is only Stephen King's 3rd published novel, and there's room for growth, right? So by the time he wrote Dr. Sleep, which was, I don't know, what was that, 35 years later, like, he had grown as a writer, and I think Dr. Sleep is just slightly more well written, even though the story might not be as compelling. I think it's just a better read. So for me, The Shining dips in quality a little bit, but it's not like a drastic drop-off like The Hero of Ages was for me. So don't hate me too much, guys. And then question 9, if you reread, let us know a book you'd like to reread before the end of this year. And, oh crap, just realized that the book I wanted to show y'all is holding up the camera. So now I have to move everything. Okay, okay. So a book that I want to reread by the end of this year in December is The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. Top 5 or top 10 book for me all time. Probably my favorite short story collection I've ever read. But I haven't read it in a very long time. I think I've read this twice now, but I haven't read it in years. And I'm pretty excited because I just reread, speaking of rereading, I reread The October Country by Ray Bradbury, which is more of a kind of spooky, horror-related short story collection by Bradbury. And I loved those short stories, and that one is definitely 5 stars for me. And I'm just so very excited to jump into this. I know it's going to be good, and I remember literally every short story being fantastic, which is rare because normally with short stories, it can be very subjective, and you can love some short stories. Some of them are kind of meh, and then some of them you just don't like. But for this one, I just remember all of them being stellar. So I'm very excited to jump into this in December. And then question 10, tag your friends. And for this, I'm not going to tag anyone specific. I'm just going to say, if you're watching this and you're interested in doing this tag, like I was when I watched Andrew's video, please feel free to do so and link it to me and I will watch it, because I had a lot of fun watching Andrew's video, and I'm probably going to go and watch and see if anyone else did this tag, which I'm sure it's a popular tag. So I'm sure a lot of people have done this. But yeah, if you're interested, please feel free to do so, and I will definitely watch it. And this was a lot of fun because like I've said, I've noticed more and more that I enjoy rereading more, which, you know, like I said, a couple of years ago, I would not have thought that. I would just thought, like, there's so many books I want to read, which is still, you know, where I'm at. Like, I have a lot of books I want to read. But at the same time, it's fun to go back and reread some of your favorite books. So, yeah. And definitely let me know down in the comments below if you're a fan of rereading, or if you're not, you know, tell me why. And if you are a fan of rereading, let me know what books you like to reread. What are some books that you've reread over and over and over again? Like for me, my most reread book has to be Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie. I've read this like 6, 7 times maybe. So what books do you keep going back to again and again? What have been your favorite rereads this year? Let me know all of that down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching, and have a terrific day.